Hello and welcome back to Educate Colin's Snap channel. How you doing? So we've just passed the May season. We're moving on to the June season. I want to discuss the cards coming out there just to kind of give everyone my thoughts, my ideas, what I think you should be looking out for, why some of these cards are good, why some of these cards might not be that powerful in retrospect, and just an overview of the next month's releases coming out. So let's get started. So first off, we're going to be talking about the season pass card. That one is Ghost Spider. We're obviously going to have its own dedicated video to the card, but this card does look very playable, does look important, and my initial thoughts is it's going to be a card that's worth purchasing. So the reason why is that it has a really nice effect in how it warps the metagame. So right now, you play something in a lane and you're pretty much assuming it's going to stay in that lane. It's not necessarily, not a lot of people playing Heimdall, not a lot of people are playing Doctor Strange or anything like that. So you can kind of just expect, hey, I'm going to Enchantress this, I'm going to Shang-Chi this, I'm going to Shadow King, lol, this kind of thing. But you really just have the window to, okay, they play the big card on 5, I'm going to counter it on 6. Now this completely flips that perspective, where if this card becomes popular, if people start playing this, you can't really fully make that read anymore. Where let's say someone plays a Dino on 5, right? You're thinking, okay, they play Dino on 5, I'm going to Shang-Chi, I'm going to Enchantress on 6. Well, if they're usually going to have priority. So they play Dino on 5, they play Ghost Spider on 6. Well, there goes your advantage, right? You've spent your turn kind of countering their card. Ghost Spider will negate that. So I just think this is going to open the ability of you to just play huge tempo in the mid game and not be too worried, because if your opponent wants to try to counter it, they can be, countered, or they can be prevented by the Ghost Spider, and that can pretty much win you the game. Now, if this becomes common enough, now it might be scary to actually start putting these Shang-Chis, putting these Enchantresses in your deck, because even Enchantress Shang-Chi, right, they're understated because people can't, mess with the card if you Shang-Chi something that's such a huge swing. But if you miss on your Shang-Chi target, if you miss on your Enchantress target, you are playing undervalued cards, right? You're playing a 4/3, a 4/5. These cards aren't the stat lines of powerful 4-cost units. And this can just say, hey, the person you playing Shang-Chi, it's not that reliable anymore. We have answers to it. We have armor. We have Ghost Spider. These things can mess you up. So you really got to be careful in how you are approaching that end game state. So the other discussion people are going to talk about is, of course, move. And I do think there's a lot of move synergy coming out. And this obviously does help move. But I think it's more important to talk about its place as a counter tool for people trying to deal with your high value units. But obviously, if you target a vulture, if you target any move synergy, really, this can really do a lot of work for you. So there is that avenue. It's not as interesting as the one I initially want to discuss, but move is getting a pretty decent amount of synergy in this particular set of rotations. So I can definitely see the argument for a move is coming with the next cards. But I do think it being a tool to kind of mess with people's counter Shang-Chi's, counter Enchantresses, things like that, is a lot more usable and friendly to players that I think this card will be important, and this card will dictate the meta. Well, not dictate the meta, but be a part of the meta. So that's my thoughts on it. Obviously, we're going to have more coming up and maybe deck ideas. But I do think it's good. I do think I would recommend it overall and see how it plays out. Next card we're going to talk about is Spider Ham. Now, this card has transformed the highest cost card in your opponent's hand into a pig, keeping its power and cost. So a pig is essentially a leech target. That's how I want you to look at it. It's going to have the stats of the transform target. So if you transform like a leader, it's going to have 6 cost, it's going to have 2 power, but instead of an ability, it's going to have the description of Oink. So it loses its ability. So it's pretty much a leech target. Now, it only targets one card in your hand, right? So it only targets the highest cost card, so it doesn't target everything. And it's not going to always transform on turn 6 or anything like Leech, right? So it's a uniquely targeted mini Leech effect, essentially. And now I think this card is going to be very good. This is probably the card I have most excited overall. I just think it's a 1-drop that you can play at any stage of the game except for the last turn. Well, you could even play the last turn just for tempo, but at any stage of the game and can have a meaningful effect. So 1-drops currently, or very good 1-drops currently, have this issue where they're really effective on 1. And after 1, they slowly lose their effectiveness and they become, not as good. So things like Sunspot, things like Nebula, things like Kitty Pryde, I think are like the 3 1-drops that people are playing a lot. And those cards on 1 are very, very strong. But as you get later into the game, they lose a lot of their relevancy. They lose a lot of their power. Where cards like Iceman, I guess, cards like Spider Ham here, you can really play them anytime before turn 6 or the last turn at least, and you can definitely get some effect out of it. This is always going to transform the highest card in their hand, and is always going to have a meaningful effect. So there's a lot of decks that do revolve around their big card, their 5-drop, their 6-drop, that kind of thing, and being able to leech that without really any meaningful counterplay is such a destructive effect. I think you're going to see a lot of it just because of Galactus, right? People are going to want to hit their Null. They're going to want to hit their Galactus. Maybe Destroyer. Maybe, Death, I guess, is another very common target. Those kind of things. So I just think it's a 1-drop. If you're playing any deck that doesn't mind having 1s, this can be a very nice tool. And there's not too many downsides to this. There's obviously Infinite, I think, is going to be the biggest benefit. And if there is a lot of Infinite decks, you might see this feel a lot worse. But I don't think Infinite has a big enough presence in what people want to be playing that you're not going to at least try out Spider Ham. Now, maybe if it becomes very popular, people might start running Infinite as a tech. But for right now, people are doing Hulk stuff. People are doing random deck building ideas, Galactus, bounce, whatever. And they're not really playing into an Infinite game plan. So I just think Spider Ham has this good window. It's a nice tool. It works very late in the game, and just is a very meaningful card that can essentially win you a game on 1 in the right circumstances. And those type of cards are really hard to, first of all, hard to balance correctly, but hard to understate like how effective they can be, right? Iceman has a very similar function where it hits a card and that can win you a game. But it's hard to know that it's winning you the game. Spider Ham does the same thing. It can hit a card, wins you the game. You don't know it's won you the game, but it can potentially do that for you. So it's the type of card I think that I like, I see, and I can definitely see myself running into the future. So that's the one I'm most excited for, but I do think there's a lot of good cards coming up. Let's look at the next one. So this is the pig, and then next up we have Spider-Man 2099. So this is a 4 energy 6 power card with the first time this moves to a location destroy enemy card here. It's interesting because it used to be a 4/5, but it got buffed. So the designers thought, oh, this is a little bit weak. Let's buff it. Now, when I talked about this card before, I was thinking, does it trigger every time it moves to a new location? So let's say you put it in one location, you move it to the left or something, it destroys a card there, then you move it to the left again, and then it destroys another card. If it worked like that, I thought this would be Omega broken, but I think the fact that they buff this card from a 4/5 to a 4/6 makes me think that it only triggers once. So if it only triggers once, I still think this is a very strong card. It's just not Omega broken, which is good because I don't think you need to add an Omega broken card here. And this does fit the move deck playstyle. It gives you more options from move deck. So I do think this card might help revitalize move deck, especially with the Ghost Spider coming up as well. I think the ability to just destroy something randomly on a beat stick like this is pretty good, pretty powerful. So I can definitely see some move deck synergies coming up and people experimenting more with move deck. I'm not the biggest move deck fan currently, but I can definitely see some of the cards coming out that will really help move deck blossom. So this is part of the tools coming out for move deck, and I do think it's pretty good, pretty strong. So I can definitely see people experimenting move deck. If you want to try it, I wouldn't judge you or anything like that. I do think move deck isn't necessarily even a bad archetype right now fully. It's just that a lot of their really good cards are so reliant on Heimdall that it telegraphs your plays and it makes it easy to counter. And there's just not a lot of like premium cards for a move right now. But if you start adding more tools for them, it does get more encouraging to have a lot of good plays for move. So I do think Spider-Man is a good card. I'm not super excited myself to play with it because it requires so much extra pieces. And you're gonna need like almost you're gonna need to buy this card and some other like Ghost Spider. You might also want Silk, which is the next card coming out, right? So it could be a pretty expensive month if you're a move deck player. So you do have to keep that in mind. If you've spent a lot of tokens in this season for a lot of cards, well then it might be hard to keep spending that way for the next particular season. So that's kind of the issue here. A lot of people have spent a lot of their tokens for High Evolutionary and Iron Lad and Jeff and that kind of thing. So it makes it a little bit difficult to say, oh, keep spending 12,000 tokens for a move deck synergy piece. So that's kind of my thoughts here. I do think it's good, but it's hard to fully recommend in the current landscape of economy, I guess. So that's the card here. And then the last card here. So only 3 cards for the weeks, right? Normally there's 4. There's like 1 card a week. This one they're missing a week here, so a bit unfortunate. But last card is Silk. So Silk is a 2 energy 5 power card with the description: after any card is played here, this moves to another location. So it's a lizard's value, but doesn't have the downside of being able to be reduced by 4 power. The downside, or you could argue, is that it's not going to stick in the location you play it. Now, I don't actually think this is really a downside a lot of the time. I actually think it just gives you some flexibility in how you want those late game board states to look like. So nice thing about this is that it can go into unreachable locations like Sanctum, like Altar of Death, those kind of Death's Domain, those kind of things. It's a pretty easy way of getting access to that location, and it can buff up Craven. I think is one of the better hits that you can synergize with. So this is just kind of a move deck ish synergy card, Craven and stuff, but there's not a lot of cards that get buffed from opponents from cards being moved, right? There's no you'd be surprised, but there's no card that says, oh, anytime a card gets moved, this gains +1/+1, or like ongoing has +1 power for every card moved this game. Something like that, right? Like that would be that'd make a lot of sense for a move deck archetype, right? To have something like that, and for some reason there's nothing like that really. So um it does feel like it fits in a move deck, but the only card that really jumps out to me is Craven, that this really takes advantage of. I wonder if there's something I'm obviously missing that it takes advantage of. The nice thing as well is that you could play like Heimdall and then have this move back into the Heimdall space, so the Heimdall isn't alone in some scenarios. You just need a little bit of priority and things like that. But there are some reasons to pick this. It's also a 2/5, which is just good, right? 2/5 stat line is really strong. So even if you're not playing this in move, I still think you can just play this generically and have a good 2-drop. So a lot of people are trying to figure out what 2s they want to rely on. Jeff is the leading angle right now, where Jeff, I think, is just super flexible, has a lot of options. And then Lizard used to be the 2-drop of choice, but I think Silk can become the 2-drop of choice. Obviously, it's a new card, so it's likely to be expensive. But they did say that they were moving 2 cards this month to Series 3. So that is something notable, that two of these cards could be starting out in Series 3. If I were to guess, it's Silk and probably the Spider Ham. I think those two makes sense. I think Spider-Man 2099 is like too unique of an effect for them to like be like, oh yeah, let's move this to Series 3. But I could see it. But I think it's probably Silk and Spider-Ham moving to Series 3. So that might make it a lot easier to pick up these cards and really experiment. But I do think this is a good card. I do think it will see some play just because it has good stats, it's flexible, and another nice thing about this is it means that your opponent cannot fully predict how the last turn is going to look like. So something that happens in this game a lot is that your opponent can guess what you're going to do last turn based on like what your deck is or what your hand is or what you played last game. They can say, oh, there's going to be this amount of power here, this amount of power here, this amount of power here. With Silk, you have to add that wrinkle of, oh, their Silk can move to this location. That's going to change the power differential. So you do have that kind of wrinkle that can actually help you in surprising your opponent or making the board state look less expected than they're hoping. So that is a nice thing about Silk, and I do think it can be pretty powerful, pretty impactful with the stat line, and I don't really have anything too bad to say about the card. The only downside is obviously it's going to be a new card. It's going to be expensive, so not everyone's going to get to play with it. But let's say this was a Series 3 card, I'd be like, oh, this is a great card to play with early on. So that is the 3 cards here. I did talk about Spider Ham being the one I'm the most excited for, but I'm a pretty controlling player. I like making sure that I have a lot of tools to work with, and Spider Ham is a card that can give me tools, especially in matchups. It's a card that helps when you can guess, oh, it might have hit this, right? If you can't guess that, oh, I played Spider Ham, they played Kitty Pryde. Okay, what cards could I have hit? Oh, I could have hit Bishop. I could have hit, their Angela or whatever, right? Like those kind of things do help you if you have that foresight or game knowledge. So that's the type of card, you know, that I like to mess with. But I do think they're all pretty playable. Obviously, there's a lot of move deck here. Silk and Spider Ham and Ghost Spider are both move deck cards. Ghost Spider being the season pass, so it's going to be accessible to more people. I would say it looks like the season pass cards are more popular than any card release these days. So you can definitely see a lot of Ghost Spider, and that could definitely change how you approach the end game. Where instead of targeting the board that the creature's in, right? If you think, oh, they might be running Ghost Spider, you could target the board where you think they're gonna move it. So it does open up some like higher level play. It makes things a little bit harder, but that's something I could definitely see happening in the future. So overall, those are the new cards coming in the June season. What do you guys think about the cards? You like any of them in particular? Anyone you're excited to get? Let me know in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next one.
Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap.